They always called it the lake place, even though it wasn't really on a lake anymore, just near one that had slowly shrunk over the years. To Emma and Daniel, it was something very different. It was the place where they escaped when work burnt them out, when the city felt too loud, when the weeks blurred together. They bought it after 7 years of saving, skipping big weddings, skipping flashy cars, skipping almost everything that looked impressive from the outside. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. They never advertised it as a vacation home to anyone else. They never listed it for rent. They never offered it as a family gathering spot. It was private, quiet, and intentionally limited. That boundary mattered to them more than they realized at the time. Daniel's parents understood that. They visited once, stayed a weekend, complimented the view, and left. Emma's parents never visited at all. And then there were her sisters-in-laws, Mark and Linda, who had always treated other people's belongings like temporary conveniences waiting to be claimed. From the very beginning, Mark and Linda spoke as if everything was communal. Other people's time, other people's money, other people's space. If someone had more, it clearly meant they had extra. And if they had extra, it was only fair to share. That was their logic, and they used it without shame. At first, it showed up in small ways, borrowing tools and returning them broken, staying an extra night after a visit without asking, making comments like, "Well, you don't really need this right now, do you?" They said it with smiles, as if entitlement sounded better when delivered warmly. Then one afternoon, Emma received a phone call that felt strangely casual for how serious it turned out to be. Linda sounded cheerful, too cheerful. "So," she said, dragging the word out, "we finally did it." "Did what?" Emma asked. "We sold the house." Emma paused. "Oh, congratulations?" "Yes, yes," Linda said quickly. "The market was just too good to pass up, and honestly, we were tired of maintaining it." Emma waited for the rest of the sentence. Experience told her there was always more. "And of course," Linda continued, "we'll need somewhere to stay for a bit." A bit. That word floated in the air like a warning sign. "How long is a bit?" Emma asked. "Oh, just a few months. Maybe 3, maybe 4. Depends on how long it takes us to figure out our next move." Emma felt her stomach tighten. "Where are you staying right now?" "Well," Linda said, still cheerful, "that's where you come in." Emma already knew the answer, but she asked anyway. "Come in how?" "At the lake place, of course," Linda said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're barely there. It just sits empty. It would be such a waste not to use it." Emma didn't respond immediately. She looked around her kitchen, at the home she and Daniel lived in full-time, the one they struggled to afford even with 2 incomes. She thought about the weekends they spent repairing the vacation house themselves, painting walls, fixing leaks, replacing warped boards. She thought about how carefully they planned each visit. "I need to talk to Daniel," she said. Linda laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, there's nothing to talk about. Family helps family." That night, Emma told Daniel everything. He listened quietly, his jaw tightening with each detail. "They sold their house without asking us if they could stay." "Yes." "And they're assuming they can live in our vacation home for months?" "Yes." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Absolutely not." Emma exhaled in relief, but also fear. "They're going to push." "Let them. It's our property. We didn't agree to this." The next morning, Daniel called Mark directly. He didn't want messages passed through Linda, twisted or softened. Mark answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, son," he said warmly. "We were just talking about you." "I heard you sold the house." "We did," Mark replied proudly. "Best decision we ever made." "And where are you staying right now?" There was a pause. "Well," said Mark carefully, "that's what we wanted to discuss." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't get emotional. He just said it plainly. "You can't stay at the lake house." There was another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean we can't?" Mark asked. "I mean we're not offering it as a place to live. It's not set up for that, and we don't." They didn't hear from Mark or Linda for almost a month after the apartment lease was signed, and the silence felt strange in a way that was both peaceful and unsettling. Emma noticed she slept better. Daniel stopped checking his phone every few minutes. Life began to settle back into its normal rhythm, but the story wasn't finished yet. It rarely ever is when pride gets wounded. The first crack in the quiet came through a mutual family group chat. It started with a message from Linda, long and carefully written, the kind that looks polite on the surface but carries sharp edges underneath every sentence. She wrote that they were finally adjusting, that the apartment was far from ideal, and that the experience had been eye-opening. Then she added a line that changed everything. She said she hoped that next time family would choose compassion over property. Emma read it twice. Daniel read it once and put the phone down. "They're testing the waters," he said. Sure enough, replies followed. A few relatives offered sympathy, others stayed silent. One aunt asked bluntly why they hadn't arranged housing before selling their home. Linda didn't respond to that question. A week later, Emma's sister invited them to dinner. She said she wanted to clear the air. Emma hesitated but agreed, knowing avoidance would only stretch the tension longer. Mark and Linda were already there when Emma and Daniel arrived. Linda hugged Emma tightly, holding on just a second too long. Mark shook Daniel's hand with forced enthusiasm. Dinner was polite at first, weather, work, small talk. Then Mark set his fork down and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, "this whole thing didn't have to turn out the way it did." Daniel looked at him calmly. "You're right, it didn't." Mark waited for more. When none came, Linda jumped in. "We just thought," she said, choosing her words carefully, "that family wouldn't let family struggle." Emma felt her chest tighten but kept her voice steady. "You weren't struggling. You were inconvenienced." Linda's smile faded. "Sleeping in your car isn't inconvenience." "You chose that," Daniel said. "There were hotels." Mark scoffed. "So now we're liars?" "No," Emma said. "You're adults who made assumptions." The table went quiet. Emma's sister shifted uncomfortably. Linda straightened in her chair. "That house means a lot to us too, you know." Daniel frowned. "How?" "It's part of the family now," Linda said. "You married into us." Daniel's voice hardened. "Marriage doesn't transfer property ownership." Mark's face flushed. "You're being cold." "No," Daniel said. "We're being clear, and we should have been clearer earlier." Linda's eyes glistened. "I hope you're prepared to live with this decision." Emma surprised herself by answering calmly. "We already are." The dinner ended shortly after that. No shouting, no apologies, just an understanding that the relationship had shifted permanently. Months passed. Summer turned into fall. Emma and Daniel visited the lake house more often than before, almost as if reclaiming it emotionally as well as physically. They painted the bedroom a softer color. They replaced the old couch. They added a small bookshelf near the window. One weekend, while Daniel was fixing the dock, a neighbor walked over. He mentioned seeing unfamiliar people around the property earlier in the year. They seemed confused, he said, kept saying they were family. Daniel smiled politely and changed the subject, but later that night he and Emma talked about it. "They really believed it was already theirs," Emma said quietly. "Yes, that's the scary part." Winter came, then spring. The drama faded into background noise, but the consequences remained. Invitations became fewer, conversations stayed shallow. Mark and Linda spoke about Emma and Daniel only in vague terms, careful not to reopen old debates that no longer found support. One afternoon, Emma's sister called again. Her tone was different this time, tired,
honest. "They're struggling," she admitted. "Not financially, emotionally. They thought this phase of life would be easier." Emma listened without interrupting. "They feel like they lost control," her sister continued, "like the world didn't bend the way it used to." Emma closed her eyes. "That's not something we can fix." "I know," her sister said quietly. A year after the house sale, Mark and Linda tried to sell the narrative one last time at a family gathering.
Time has a way of softening the noise while sharpening the truth, and that was exactly what happened next. The story didn't explode again right away. Instead, it seeped slowly into everyday moments, resurfacing when least expected, like a bruise that still aches long after it fades from view. The first real sign came during the holidays. For years, Mark and Linda had hosted large gatherings, proud of their home and eager to be at the center of everything. That house had been their stage. Now, with the apartment too small and too inconvenient, the tradition collapsed. Invitations went out late, plans shifted constantly. Everyone felt the absence, even if no one said it out loud. Emma and Daniel chose not to attend that year. They sent a polite message, a gift card, and their regards. Mark responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Linda didn't respond at all. Instead, Linda began posting online. At first, it was vague, quotes about betrayal, about how some people forget where they came from, about how kindness is rare in modern families. Emma blocked her after the third post, but friends and relatives still mentioned it. "She's really hurt," one cousin said gently. Emma nodded. "I believe that." What she didn't say was that hurt didn't automatically make someone right. By spring, the apartment lease was up for renewal. Mark didn't want to renew it. The rent was increased, the building was noisy, the neighbors didn't respect them the way homeowners once did. The reality of downsizing felt heavier every day. That's when Mark called Daniel again. This time, his voice was calmer, older, tired. "I'm not calling to argue," Mark said. "I just want to talk." Daniel agreed, cautiously. Mark talked about the apartment, about how selling the house had felt like freedom at first, about how quickly that freedom turned into uncertainty. "I thought we'd have more options," Mark admitted. "I didn't think we'd feel displaced." Daniel listened. "We raised you," Mark continued. "We thought that meant something." "It does, but it doesn't mean you get to decide how we use what we've built." There was a long silence. "I guess I didn't realize how much that house meant to you," Mark said finally. "That's because you never asked," Daniel replied gently. The call ended without resolution, but something had shifted. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just recognition. Meanwhile, Linda took a different path. She began telling the story as a warning. She told younger relatives not to rely on anyone. She told friends that nothing is guaranteed. She framed herself as someone who had been naive, not entitled. And slowly, subtly, the tone changed. People stopped arguing with her version. They simply stopped engaging, because actions spoke louder than framing. A second summer passed. The lake house became a place of tradition for Emma and Daniel now. Morning coffee on the deck, long walks at dusk, no guests unless invited, no explanations required. One weekend, Emma found an old notebook in a drawer. It was from the first year they owned the place, a list of goals, repairs, ideas, boundaries. One line stood out: "Protect this space." She showed it to Daniel and they laughed softly. "We did," he said. That fall, a cousin called asking for advice. Her and her husband were thinking of selling their house and traveling for a year. "Where will you stay when you come back?" Emma asked. "We haven't figured that out yet," the cousin said. Emma paused. "Figure that out first." The cousin laughed. "Yeah, I learned that lesson from someone else's mistake." Not long after, Mark and Linda renewed their lease. It wasn't their dream, it was what was available. They stopped talking about the lake house entirely. At a family funeral the following year, Emma and Linda stood side by side for nearly 10 minutes. They spoke about the weather, about mutual acquaintances, about nothing important. Before walking away, Linda quietly said, "I hope you know, I didn't expect things to turn out like this." Emma looked at her. Neither did we. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't closure, but it was honest. Years later, when Emma and Daniel eventually sold the lake house, they did it on their own terms. They upgraded, they moved forward. They never told Mark and Linda until after the papers were signed. By then, it no longer mattered, because the lesson had already settled into everyone's bones. Selling something you own doesn't give you ownership over someone else's future. Assuming access isn't the same as being invited. In the years that followed, the story slowly lost its sharp edges. It stopped being something people whispered about and became something quietly understood. No one brought it up directly anymore, but its influence lingered in small, careful decisions, people double-checking plans, asking instead of assuming, thinking twice before counting on what wasn't theirs. Mark and Linda aged into a different phase of life than they had imagined. The confidence they once carried so loudly softened into caution. They stayed in the apartment longer than planned, then moved again, downsizing once more. Each move reminded them that certainty is fragile and that control can disappear faster than it's built. They never admitted fault, but they also never made the same assumption again. Emma and Daniel, on the other hand, grew steadier. Not richer in dramatic ways, not louder, not more impressive to outsiders, just steadier. They learned that saying no doesn't make you cruel and that protecting what you've built doesn't require justification. Their relationship strengthened, anchored by the knowledge that they could stand together even when pressure came from every direction. Occasionally, Emma would think back to that first phone call, to the casual confidence in Linda's voice when she assumed the lake house was already hers. The memory no longer made her angry. It felt distant, like a lesson learned in a previous life. At one family gathering years later, a younger relative joked about crashing at someone's place for a few months after selling their home. The room went quiet for just a moment. Then laughter followed, uneasy but aware. Someone said, "Yeah, maybe don't do that without asking." Emma caught Daniel's eye. They didn't smile, they didn't need to. The lake house itself eventually became a memory, replaced by new chapters and new places, but the boundary it represented stayed with them. It shaped how they gave, how they shared, and how they said no without guilt. Because the truth had revealed itself slowly and clearly. Entitlement doesn't announce itself as entitlement. It disguises itself as expectation. And the moment expectation goes unchallenged, it grows. But when it meets a firm, calm refusal, it collapses under its own weight. In the end, no one was ruined. No one was saved. There were no dramatic apologies or grand reconciliations, just consequences, just clarity, just peace. And sometimes that's the most powerful ending of all.